Ever since early man realised that if you can shred a mean guitar, people will think you're cool, the moral guardians of the world have fretted over the influence music has on young minds. For instance, when John Lennon said the fateful lines,
"Christianity will go, it will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right and I'll be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now."
people lost their damn minds, burning Beatles albums, destroying merch, and generally making a big mess all over their respective cities. Eventually, even the Pope got involved to give John Lennon a bollocking, leading to a public apology from the man himself.
Including Jesus, but I said it in that way, which is the wrong way, Well, some teenagers have...
But if right-wing Christians were upset with John Lennon for comparing his fame to Jesus, then they were about to get a whole lot angrier, because around the corner was a gathering storm. A storm by the name of heavy metal, and it was the devil's own jam. Not surprising then that some people thought it was going to be the greatest battle upstanding society had ever faced. So the desire for more extreme and provocative music led to the use of more extreme and provocative imagery as a way of freaking out those record-burning squares. This wasn't done because they'd joined some kind of devil-worshipping cult. It was done because it was cool and it freaked people out.
I'm the Prince of Darkness.
These moral guardians took the bait with the enthusiasm of a priest in a playground, blaming all of society's ills on this new breed of anti-establishment long-haired rock and roller.
They call it heavy metal. Some would say it's the selling of Satanism.
Bands like AC/DC, Def Leppard and Marilyn Manson have all been accused of leading young'uns astray by various organisations over the year. Sometimes it even goes as far as getting Johnny Law involved.
I think a certain reserve is called for.
So by now you're probably thinking, why is this twat talking about public outrage? I thought this was a fucking Warhammer video. Well, I'm talking about it because I want to make my own heavy metal space marines, not any old noise marine. Oh no, I want these guys to be metal as fuck and out there upsetting nans all over the 40k universe. Now, don't get me wrong. Games Workshop knows metal. They even used to be a record company for a little while and produced Bolt Thrower's first album, Realm of Chaos, which has some pretty subtle references to 40k if you look hard enough. And although there are models like the Orc Rocker and the Slanesh Sound Marines that carry instruments into battle, these are still few and far between. Even the current set of the Slanesh Sound Marines are carrying these things that look more like ray guns than they do guitars, and I want my guys to be beating back their foes with mind-bending riffs. So I started like I always do by just getting some basic shapes in ZBrush and smashing them together like a caveman making a mud effigy. It's true that ZBrush has a steep learning curve, but that doesn't mean that you can't just jam a bunch of shapes together to make a sculpture. No one needs to know you didn't use all the fancy tools as long as it looks alright in the end.
So if I don't have a pose in mind when I start a model, I usually just make the parts in a T-pose and work it out later. But for this model I did have a pose in mind, and that was the ridiculously low, wide-legged stance of the band Def Clock in the Metapocalypse cartoons.
My plan in these early stages was to pair this stance with the classic metalhead look. Sleeveless top, bunch of ammo belts and spikes and that, and long hair to whip around when overexcited.
At this stage I needed to make a guitar to use for the rest of the creation process with my models. I toyed with the idea of doing a keytar at first, but decided it wasn't metal enough, eventually going for the most metal guitar there is, the Gibson Flying V.
And although I was making good progress, I was still pretty rudderless at this stage. I just made a kind of a skeleton to hang ideas on, really, and I needed to go back and make myself a plan.
I wasn't going to get away with just battle jackets and new rock boots. I had to go deeper.
The next thing to take into account are the many different flavours of metal. There are more subgenres of metal than there are stars in the night sky. And if you get a band mixed up into the wrong genre, then the metal community will rain scorn down upon you from high. So for the sake of this, I thought I'd only focus on a few.
So the first morsel of metal we're going to sample is black metal. And you remember how I was saying before that all that devil shit and stuff in other metal was just performative? Well, black metal is what happens when you take all of that shit seriously and has a sinister history of church burnings, racism and even a couple of murders thrown in. But don't worry about that shit right now, because all we want from black metal is their strappy bondage gear and impractically large spiky bracelets. So the other influence I used in these early stages is the total opposite end of the metal spectrum to black metal, and that's hair metal, a genre that embodies coked up confidence and wearing trousers so tight the first 4 rows can tell if you're circumcised. But there is still something we can take from these Hollywood strip smackheads. Well, one thing in particular. And that's the hair. Unsurprisingly, hair metalers have great hair, and if I want my squad to stand up against them, they've got to be barnetted up and looking fly. So with the design basics locked away in my head, I was making progress like a postman with the shit. So I opened up a new ZBrush folder and started making a set of armour. This is a good thing to do when you're making armoured models, because you can just save these parts as tools and use them throughout the rest of the range. I had tried not to do the typical Space Marine shoulder pads because I just felt like it was too mainstream, you know. These guys are underground, brutal metalers. They don't need shoulder pads like every other Space Marine, and that's an ideal I will never give up. But black metal and big hair weren't my only influences. There was another metal genre that I wanted to touch on, and that was death metal, specifically the art on the album covers. These albums were like the video nasties of the record shop. And much like death metal itself, that was designed to be graphic and shocking, and I wanted a little taste of that in my models as well. A while ago I made this model that had an exposed brain so that he could be blasting music directly into his nerve holes, and I thought about doing this throughout the range to give them that death metal album covery gross out feel. But in the end I decided to tone it down and just go for a kind of weird mouth and tongue thing and a couple of severed heads on the backpack. I didn't want to saturate him in death metal vibes. So at this point I had something that looked a bit like this, and I was thinking it was a good start to my squad. So I decided to post a picture of this on a Facebook group to try to get some feedback on how I was doing, and the response was overwhelming.
I like it, but I just wish the shoulder pads were a bit more Space Marine-y.
Shoulder pads look wrong, bro. You need to put on the classic.
I think the
Space
shoulder
Marines
pads
design.
could do with a bit of
I'd
changing.
love to see a version with Space Marine shoulder pads, the classic round one. Change the fucking shoulder pads. So obviously I immediately made a version with the classic shoulder pads, because let's face it, that's true metal after all, not like the poser type metal that I was doing before, and I'll never betray that ideal. Then I used the parts I had already made to knock up a few other variations and give them each their own flavour, change their faces and heads a bit, that kind of thing. As I was saying before, pulling these tools in and repositioning them makes it really quick to get an initial skeleton for your other models, and then you can just start with the fiddly bits almost straight away. Ended up making 2 more miniatures to go alongside my first guy. One of the guys was kind of bucking the hair trend by having a bald head with spikes on, but I felt he was more kind of the exception that proved the rule. And the other one was this weird kind of bird type character, and although I didn't like him just at the moment, I felt like he had a good energy, some spunk and pep, a real scrappy do of the bunch. Now having a squad of 4 dudes all playing heavy metal riffs is cool and all, but I really wanted to mix it up a bit, add a little bit of diversity with another different kind of guitar, a bass player if you will. And if you're looking for inspiration on weird and wacky guitars, there's only really one place you have to turn. Michael Angelo Battio. This son of a bitch played 2-handed guitar on a guitar with 4 necks. That's more guitars than he has hands to play them, but that didn't stop him. He was flicking away at them strings like a game of musical whack-a-mole, making sweet love to the fretboards. And although a 4-headed guitar looks fucking stupid, you can get these cool 2-headed guitars which look a bit more manageable as a weapon on a battlefield, and decided that that would be the basis for my bass player's bass. But at this point I was just kind of throwing a lot of ideas at the wall. I wanted it to look cool, I wanted to get a good sort of guitar-like shape, but I didn't really have that much of a plan. In the end I had something that looked like this, and this, my friends, is total trash. A mix-mash of ideas. I didn't know what was going on. You can see I even tried to pull the keytar back out. I tried for something new and ended up making something totally shite. I needed to go back to the drawing board on these weapons and work out what was going on and what I was doing. So I booted up internet.com to do some research into how sound weapons were used in real life. But I needed some help, I needed some guidance, and if there's one band that knows intergalactic sound warfare better than anybody else, it's gotta be GWAR. So I decided to call my old buddy, Beefcake the Mighty, the bassist of GWAR, in the way that he likes to be contacted by his old mates, through the Cameo messaging app for the price of 40 buckaroos. Hello mate, best friend Stoney here, how you doing?
Hey Stoney! It's me, It's your old buddy Beefcake from GWAR.
Yeah, I was just calling to ask to see if in your intergalactic travels you've ever seen any sound weapons, if you've ever seen sound being used as a weapon, and what you might think a sound weapon might look like.
For a stupid human, you ask a pretty legit question. Obviously, you can use sound as a weapon. The Horn of Jericho brought the walls a-tumbling down. Yeah. Hey, David Koresh in Waco, they pumped in all kinds of crazy fucking shit to drive those bastards crazy. The bass guitar is a excellent weapon. Not only do you crank it up and crush the eardrums of your foes, you can also pull it off and bash their fucking brains in, which I've done before many times and look forward to doing it again.
Call ended.
Beefcake had given me a lot to think about. So Beefcake had mentioned the siege at Waco, where the ATF had blasted the Branch Davidians with a cacophony of different sounds. Everything from Nancy Sinatra, Christmas carols, to a recording of rabbits being killed. You would have thought they would have had a few questions for the guy whose tape that was, but I think everyone just ignored it. Guantanamo Bay notoriously uses a method called futility music, where they routinely flood a prisoner's cell with sound in order to foster a sense of futility. But is it possible to be physically damaged by sound, like the weapons that the Noise Marines have? And the answer to that is not really, but there are examples in nature. For instance, the humble pistol shrimp can snap its claws with such velocity it creates a sonic blast that can knock out its prey or even stun much bigger fish than itself. I did start to wonder whether these subsonic snapping claws were anything to do with the original design decision to give Slanesh demons claws, but then again I have no proof for that beyond this wild speculation. The Sound Marine weapons have varied wildly in appearance over the years. They either look like a cross between a Hoover and a car door, or they go for a kind of a Kane Roberts type thing where you get a guitar and strap a gun on the bottom of it. In the end I went for a kind of best of both worlds. Toaster up front, guitar in back. That way it looks like whatever power it's generating is coming from the guitar part. I knew I was going to have to add a speaker of some kind. I thought, what's more metal than a decapitated head, somehow having its vocal cords being used to give the speaker a bit of extra oomph. I started adding this kind of piping after finding out about this guy,
Dr. Vladimir Gavro,
who created these two prototypes for weapons, the infrasonic organ and the infrasonic whistle. And although neither of them worked out quite as well as he was expecting, he maintained that it would be possible to kill an enemy silently using inaudible sound waves. But whether or not his weapons worked mattered little to me, because I liked the many pipes on his infrasonic whistle, and as a result I'd gone pipe crazy over on my sonic guitars, before also making an improved pipier bass for my bass player, as well as an alternative pipey chess piece, because like I said, I really had gone fucking pipe crazy. So at this stage I had my 4 heavy metal Space Marines looking pretty good, ready to go. They had cool hair, they had leather straps, they had a bit of blood and gore, all the things that we'd talked about, and they had their own personalities each one. But every good team needs a strong leader, and my plan was to revisit the old brain out Pleasure Lord from a while ago, but combine it with the ultrasonic whistle and a pipe organ. So we're back at it, ramming shapes together, but this time with the benefit of experience, because we already know what the 4 guys who this guy's in charge of going to look like, so that gives us a bit of an advantage. I know I want to make him super mega pipey, I know I want his brain exposed, and I know I want him doing something metally. I had toyed with the idea of putting him in a really energetic pose to replicate the best act I've ever seen, Iggy Pop.
Whatever you say, boomer. Okay, boomer, yeah, boomer.
In the end I decided to go for a more come and get it from my metal hand pose. In the end I had something that looked like this, and I was feeling pretty happy with it. It had the exposed brain to freak out the squares, had a cool intricate pipe organ, big flowing cape and the kind of bondage straps that the others had as well to sort of tie them all together. And that was it, he was ready to go and join his crew. Fast Johnny, Hot Dog Charlie, Fat Norris and Frankie Piss. And just when I thought I was done, I got an urgent LinkedIn private message from Welshie over at Large Blast Podcast HQ, telling me that he'd done a cool painting tutorial for my Noise Lord.
So this morning I received a package from Stoney. As I've come to expect, it was wrapped in bog roll, but what was inside was super cool. It was his new heavy metal Noise Boy. I'm really excited to get some paint on this, especially that brain, that organ behind the head, the flowing cape and curved sword, as well as all the detailing on the armour panels. When you hear heavy metal, you might think black, but I think pink, and here's the proof. Heavy metal god himself, Ozzy Osbourne, and Black Sabbath album, Paranoid. I'm also a little bit inspired by this crazy album by Pantera, but God knows what the person who designed this was thinking. Right, onto the paint scheme. Base with lead belcher, it's a nice undercoat for contrast. Vulpes pink, a nice rich pink for the armour panels. Nasdrag yellow gives you a great yellow gold over all of the trim, makes it way quicker. Carrick stone for any flesh or skull areas. Baden black, nice smooth coat for the cape, you'll see why later. And then wildwood for any of the brown leathery bits. So here you have it. Base coat's on nicely, and I managed not to get too much of it anywhere. You'll also see I've left anything I wanted silver completely bare. It's the beauty of working with the lead belcher undercoat. So moving on to the cape, I wanted it to match the rest of my army, and I used this Green Stuff World colour shift paint. The trick with this is to put it on in lots of very thin layers, because it's really designed for a dry brush. For the skin, I'm going to go for a thin layer of Guilliman flesh, and then I'm going to move on to the brain, where I'm using Aphomatic blue, mixed a little bit with Warp Lightning to give an ethereal touch that will match the basing later. So here we are. You can see that colour shift really changing in the light, and the angles between that purple and green gives it a really ethereal taste. The brains turned out really nicely, looking kind of magical. For those kind of pipe work, I was going to leave them silver, but I'm actually now going to build them up from Celesta Grey to White Scar, and then put a thin coat of Aphomatic blue to give them a kind of glowing effect, as you can see here. I'm really happy with that finish, though I might add a bit more Aphomatic blue into the gap to darken the contrast. The final highlights: Emperor's Children pink for the armour, Flayed One flesh for the skin, Retributor gold for the trim, and Doom Ball for anything leathery. So here it is, the finished product, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. It's been a lovely model to paint, lots of space to get that contrast working between the pink of the armour and that flowing skirt, as well as the neon blue tubes on the armour pieces. Can't wait to get my hands on the rest of the models.
All in all, I like how the models came out, and I think they met the parameters that I set for them. I guess the only thing left to do now is to give my Nan a call and see how she feels about them. Oh, she is vexed. Mission accomplished. So if you've enjoyed this video, make sure to give it the old thumbs up, subscribe and a comment and all that good stuff. If you like the models, I have hidden some subtle messages in the video about where you can find the models, so just have a look for them. And why not give the podcast a try, eh? It's basically the same as this, but in audio format, and I think you'll get a kick out of it. Alright then, see you next time. I've been Stoney. Bye bye.